Innistrad, magic's horror plane, filled with genre-defining monsters such as werewolves, zombies and vampires. Have you ever wondered though, why the vampires are aristocrats? Why are they nobles? Surely for a horror plane, there are scarier things for vampires to think of than painting and partying? And yes, there is. We'll come to that. While Shadows over Innistrad dipped into cosmic horror and body horror, the plane originated as a plane specifically set in the Gothic Horror genre. In that source material, vampires are often aristocrats. My name is Gerrit, the brains of this operation is Alma, and these are the vampires of Innistrad and their Gothic Horror roots. There will be spoilers for all these works, so if you're intent on reading or watching any of them spoiler-free, this has been your spoiler warning. Ready? Let's go! John William Polidori wrote the short story The Vampire in 1819. It's not much of a read, both in size and in quality, but it's a historically important text. In this book, Vampires, Lord Byron to Count Dracula, Sir Christopher Frayling says that The Vampire was the first story successfully to fuse the disparate elements of vampirism into a coherent literary genre. The vampire in this story is the nobleman Lord Ruthven, who tortures the orphan Aubrey by repeatedly upheaving his life, including killing his love interest and marrying his sister. Edgar Markov is similarly not much in size and in quality, but historically important. He was the one who struck a deal with the demon Shilgengar for the knowledge to become a vampire. Food was increasingly scarce because of a famine. Edgar deemed it better to not starve instead.
I want you to love me for all your life.
In 1871, Sharon Le Fanu wrote Carnilla, a story about a young woman named Laura being preyed upon by the titular and temperamental Carnilla. For instance, when Laura joins a hymn of a passing funeral procession, Carnilla berates Laura because the singing supposedly hurts her ears.
Stop it! Stop it!
Carnilla, what is it?
Later in the story, Laura and her father learn of Millarca, who has killed another young girl.
That girl is a guest in my house. Her name is Carnilla. And my daughter is dying.
Carnilla and Millarca are the same person, pseudonyms of Marcalla, Countess Karnstein, a vampire. After a quick hunt, Carnilla is being dealt with. This story became the progenitor of the lesbian vampire trope.
Lesbian vampires from outer space.
A movie adaptation was released in 1970 under the name The Vampire Lovers.
Oh, Marcella, you're so kind to me. I swear I shall die when you leave.
In this adaptation, the vampire Marcella stalks and kills Laura, after which she changes her name to Carnilla and preys on a girl named Emma and wants to take her home.
Carnilla, why do you always sit in the shade?
The sun is too bright for me. It hurts my eyes.
Sadly, the film doesn't show the most poignant scene of the original story. Near the end, Carnilla lies in her tomb, immersed in 7 inches of blood, eyes open, seemingly regenerating. She's been dispatched in a most familiar way. Her heart is staked and her head is cut off. Then her remains are burned and the ashes are scattered in a river. The best magic equivalent for Carnilla is Anya Falkenrath, whose flavor text is reminiscent of Carnilla's sudden fits and temperamental nature. Her maid of honor appearance is interpreted as lesbian, especially in the more sapphic circles. It's a tenuous connection, but if we get a card of Anya resting in a coffin filled with blood, it's sealed. The connection, not the coffin. Anya's progenitor on Innistrad was once a famous falconer, but he has been dead for a long time. The bloodline, however, is still strong and maintains the castle in Gaia Reach. The Falkenrath vampires embrace their violent tendencies, but have some idea when to rein it in, and not relinquish all their pretense at nobility. They are more capable of flight than other houses, fitting their namesake.
I am Dracula.
Dracula by Bram Stoker is the most well-known vampire. Not only has the novel from 1897 stood the test of time, it has been adapted and remixed in so many different media it's nigh impossible to give a complete and exhaustive overview. It's at least way beyond the scope of this video. However, we'll shortly go over 3 interpretations. Dracula is an epistolary novel, meaning it tells the tale in the form of letters, diary entries, news articles, etc. Similar to how magic stories with Gisa and Geralf are structured. It starts with Jonathan Harker's diary entries, relating how he's traveling to Transylvania. He needs to meet up with Dracula to sell a house back in England.
Oh, yes. Everything is in order, awaiting your signature.
Jonathan notices something is wrong when he is at the castle. The vampire travels to England and Jonathan follows him. Dracula feeds on a girl named Lucy Westenra for several nights, eventually turning her into a vampire. He tries to do the same to her best friend, Mina Harker, Jonathan's wife, but is forced to flee back to his castle in Transylvania after being discovered and hunted. Four men and a vampire-cursed Mina are on his heels just before Dracula reaches his castle. Before the night falls, they catch up to him and slay him, freeing Mina from her vampiric curse.
There's nothing more to fear, Miss Mina. Dracula is dead forever.
Bela Lugosi's performance in the 1931's Dracula is unforgettable.
It reminds me of the broken battlements of my own castle in Transylvania.
His manner of speech has informed how vampires talk for so long. It's become a cliché, a parody.
It reminds me of the broken battlements of my own castle in Transylvania.
The following is from the Welcome to the Castle Dracula Secret Lair page, where it's even called a Dracula accent. Welcome to my castle, traveler. Please make yourself at home, won't you? During research, the name Elizabeth Miller kept popping up. She was a scholar and very knowledgeable about Dracula. In an interview with the Vampire Source, he notes that the 1977 miniseries from the BBC adheres the closest to Stoker's text. It certainly feels very British and time appropriate, more so than any other adaptation. The longer runtime allows it to show more from the novel. It's slower and more sinister as a result. The sound design is also very satisfying, just listen to this paper being ripped. The novel, this miniseries and the Dracula cards feel like different versions of the very same thing, rather than adaptations. Mina's card is especially delightful. In the novel she is smart and enterprising, while the 1931 movie made her passive and dumb. The miniseries starts off with her mentioning she's going to study shorthand, a method of writing Jonathan uses.
So that I shall be able to do your letters when we're married.
Later it shows her discussing plans with the four men. She literally has a seat at the table. And look how Van Helsing describes her in the flavor text, quoted from the novel. Once more our teacher. She sets them back on track again. Mina has another character development in a more contemporary movie adaptation. This movie from 1992 tries to give Dracula a more human backstory by killing off his wife while he's off warlording. In his grief he renounces God, desecrates the chapel in his castle, stabs a stone cross and drinks the blood that pours from it, becoming a vampire. For the most part the movie follows the same plotlines. In this version Dracula is shown to de-age after he gorges on his victim's blood. In his first appearance he is bleak and grey.
Welcome to my home.
Later he's strolling around outside, preying on Mina, a reincarnation of his long-lost wife. He looks 30 years younger, his hair is black and his skin has some color. He seduces her and lets her feed on him. But is interrupted and chased back to his castle. There Dracula is killed by Mina, who does so with love. And the earlier stabbed cross regenerates. We already discussed how Edgar caused vampires to exist on Innistrad. Edgar also has notes of Dracula in him, his old appearance especially reminiscent of the 1992 version. Both he and Sorin's legendary cards were chosen to represent Dracula. There is no better family of vampires to do so. Markov is after all the most prestigious and most widespread of the bloodlines.
Nosferatu the undead, he who drinketh the blood of his victims.
9 years before Dracula was brought to life on the big screen by Bela Lugosi, Friedrich Wilhelm Murnau directed a silent film under the name Nosferatu. In this version, Dracula is renamed Count Orlok and the Harkers are now Alan and Hutter. It follows mostly the same story as Dracula, with a major change being the demise of the vampire. In Nosferatu, Count Orlok comes to his end by becoming distracted by Alan's beauty. As the sun rises and shines on the Count, he is the first ever vampire to be burned to ashes by sunlight. The film was almost lost to history as the rights to make it were never cleared. The company could not be sued for copyright infringement as they were bankrupt. German courts had ownership and settled to destroy all copies, as Bram Stoker's widow claimed that its mere existence prejudices my dramatization and cinematic rights. Luckily, a few copies survived abroad, and nowadays the film is widely available. Werner Herzog made a remake in 1979. It changes the characters' name back to the original ones from the novel and shuffles their roles in the story around a bit. It mostly pays homage to the first Nosferatu.
Count Dracula.
Jonathan Harker. You have been expected and are welcome in my castle.
In the remake, the vampire has a voice, which he uses to profess his struggle with immortality.
To be unable to grow old is terrible.
And solitude.
The absence of love is the most abject pain.
At the end, he succumbs to sunlight and becomes rigid, finally able to die. 6 years before Innistrad saw the day of light, Homelands was released. This expansion was set on a new plane named Olgrotha. In a sense, it was before its time, before planes had a distinct identity. The black cards undeniably flirt with Gothic Horror sensibilities. There are cemeteries, tombstones, and last but not least, aristocratic vampires. Baron Sengir was summoned from Dominaria to Olgrotha by a planeswalker and is now stuck there. Unable to leave, he made it his home. The last page of the Homelands comic has Baron Sengir echoing Nosferatu, with the line, "I envy you your sleep." Individual cards have been slowly added to the Sengir family, usually on the Dominarian side. Recently we had the invasion of Olgrotha, Sengir Connoisseur and Ferak. Before that, Baron Sengir received a new iteration. The bloodline was expanded with Karasov in Dominaria and Yuri in the 10th edition reprint of Soul Feast. If you need any assurance of the connection between the Sengir bloodline and the Nosferatu films, look no further than Time Spiral's Sengir Nosferatu.
Orders from the house.
While Bram Stoker's Dracula is exemplary for Gothic horror, the genre has been in a constant development since. Stephen King has been a huge contributor in recent decades. For instance, his book The Shining from 1977, which despite not having any vampires, is a Gothic novel with horror elements. It was made into the classic 1980s film which also influenced Innistrad. Say it with me. Here's Johnny! Or rather Jack Torrance. He is being hired to take care of a hotel during the off-season. During his interview, he gets told a story of a previous caretaker.
Hired a man named Charles Grady as the winter caretaker. And he came up here with his wife and two little girls, I think about 8 and 10. He must have suffered some kind of a complete mental breakdown. He killed his family with an axe.
During the first part of the movie, the two girls appear repeatedly to Danny, Jack's son. They also appear in short flashes to the viewer, to unsettle. This shot in particular has become so well known that anytime there are twin girls in blue dresses in any media, especially horror, it demands comparison. So when Rudy and Carmine, the twins of Maurer estate, appear in Shadows over Innistrad, the connection between the Maurer bloodline and the Shining started to form. Jack arrives at the hotel with Wendy and Danny, his family. Over the course of the film, a lingering evil in the hotel slowly gets a grip on Jack. When Jack orders a drink that should have been cleared out from a barman that shouldn't be there, he doesn't have to pay. It's on the house.
Orders from the house.
Stefan Maurer is the head of the Maurer family. In the story, the devouring house, he's being chased by a vampire hunter who then, inexplicably, kills himself. His blood splatters everywhere over an old rune. Stefan tries to lick up some blood but finds it has all disappeared into the stones, and a whole house has sprung up around him. The house is actively hostile to Stefan trying to leave, similar to what Wendy experiences when she tries to flee the hotel. This type of horror is called Gladfora in Innistrad and it's feeding on Stefan's fears. He manages to get away eventually before stumbling around in the snow. The ending is left ambiguous, but if we never see him again, he probably froze to death, like Jack.
"30 years had passed, yet her body remained that of an eternal child."
1 year before Stephen King's The Shining was released, Anne Rice released her book, Interview with the Vampire. This was made into a film in 1994 with Brad Pitt as Louis de Pont du Lac, who is the vampire being interviewed. He tells the tale of his first decades as a vampire, starting with how he became a vampire, newly sired by Lestat the Lion Court. At first Louis is dealing with the guilt of having to kill for blood. He'd rather feed on animals than humans. Much to the dismay of Lestat.
Whiny coward of a vampire who prowls the night killing rats and poodles. You could have finished us both, you...
In a moment of weakness, Louis finds an orphan girl clinging to her dead mother and decides to feed on her. Horrified, he flees away. Back at their hotel, Lestat gives him the choice. Kill her or he'll sire her. Louis refuses to kill and Lestat lets the girl feed on him, turning her into a vampire.
I want some more.
The child Claudia now has to spend the rest of her existence as a child, never growing up, becoming a woman.
Don't you want her?
I want to be her.
Always looked down on and treated differently. Alison Stein said it perfectly in her article The Eternal Sadness of a Child Vampire. However a child vampire is made, they represent an adult's mistake, a moment of weakness, poor judgment. The aberrant child vampire highlights inequality, a deviant even among deviants. Someone's got to be at the bottom of the bloodsucker rung, and it's kid vamps who have no power, no say and no future. Claudia screams in anguish when she realizes she'll always stay like this. She takes her revenge on Lestat by tricking him into drinking blood from a dead body.
You let me drink dead blood? You...
This almost kills him and Louis and Claudia flee to Europe. In France they meet other vampires who reveal that vampire children should not exist.
It's forbidden to make one so young, so helpless, and cannot survive on its own.
The vampire children on Innistrad have a slightly better fate than being helpless and at the whims of others. Though much like Claudia, they are vicious and not to be trifled with. In the dolorous weight of pleasantries, Cordelia Stromkirk knows better than to mess with a child vampire, or as they called, Nosfer, probably another reference to Nosferatu, who understands the pain of vampire children. If not being able to grow old is terrible, how bad is it not being able to grow up? Cordelia ponders very aristocratically that it's unbecoming to eviscerate someone at a wedding. Immediately following it up with, doesn't stop the Nosfer though. To drive the point home, a little boy Nosfer stakes a Markov vampire with his own hand and leaves him to bleed out and die. All the martial skill on the plane won't save you against the pure predator instinct of a Nosfer. A child vampire must be harsher and more cruel to demand respect, and will do so.
Cthulhu Fthagn. What a wonderful phrase.
Cthulhu Fthagn! Say it and you're crazed!
It's not only Gothic horror that influenced Innistrad and its vampires. When it was time to return to Innistrad with shadows over Innistrad, the name itself was a reference to Lovecraft's novella The Shadow over Innsmouth. This foreshadowed the cosmic horror entity that was to come in Eldritch Moon. The novella tells the story of an unnamed protagonist who is looking into his own genealogy. He travels to Innsmouth where the people are reclusive and in various stages of being transformed into fish people. They have gills, webbed hands and unblinking eyes. The land is said to be fertile once, but now it's covered in sand and stumps. The trees have all been cut down, robbing the soil of protection. After being chased by the strange people, the protagonist managed to flee Innsmouth. But in the final chapter, he too has, as he calls it, acquired the Innsmouth look. Cthulhu Fthagn, he thinks to himself. Vampires on Innistrad were put in black and red because black and blue was reserved for zombies, and neither white nor green felt correct. Blue-black vampires would be more shapeshifters and mind control oriented, like Ravnica's Dimir vampires. Blue vampires don't just drink one's vitality, they also consume one's sanity. However, there is a bloodline on Innistrad that is more concerned with the mind than blood. The bloodline that felt Emrakul's presence most, and had more members than any other Eldrazified according to the cards. The Stromkirks. Before Runo Stromkirk became a vampire and the progenitor of his line, he was a high priest. He worshipped an ancient god of seas and storms, hints of which were still lingering. He moved to Drunau, at the coast of Nephalia, away from Stensia and the political and social tomfoolery of the other vampire families. In Nephalia, Runo subsidized crafters to build houses and boats from wood. He helped alchemists and magisters in vampire-friendly research practices. All in an effort to deforest Nephalia, as living wood is harmful to vampires. During Crimson Vow, the night seemed eternal. Runo decided to summon Crotus, an ancient and powerful kraken horror with tentacles in his face, similar to depictions from the Cthulhu mythos. Some Stromkirk vampires have learned how to transform themselves into mist, while others are excellent fencers. The Stromkirks usually get mixed up with the various cults around Nephalia. Jeleva disapproves of that behavior and has broken all ties with her family. She lives in a mansion near Havengul and likes to play cruel games of cat and mouse with her victims. She feasts on her victims' minds before feasting on their blood, stealing both knowledge and life force. Except Gisa. Jeleva feels strongly that devouring Gisa's mind would damage her own.
Noble houses of Innistrad, raise your glass. Not to a blushing bride, but to a queen.
The big bloodline we haven't talked about yet are the Fthagn. When Olivia Fthagn was printed, she was only the 13th legendary vampire in Magic. Very fitting for a plane obsessed with this supposedly unlucky number. You could compare Olivia with the Brides of Dracula, as she is wanting to marry Edgar Markov during Crimson Vow. However, in a sense the Fthagn are the culmination of everything aristocratic vampire through a magic lens. It started in the first Innistrad set with Olivia Fthagn as the first legendary vampire from Innistrad. Recently, Crimson Vow was a whole set dedicated to her that deals with her marriage of convenience. It has gorgeous black and white basic lands that radiate Gothic Horror. The accompanying showcase frame has sharp teeth and an elegant filigree that echoes blood trails. Sorin is his moody self. Anya doesn't want to be there, but has to fulfill obligations. Runo is living his best life, summoning Crotus with his abs. Edgar is looking more like a zombie in a suit than a vampire groom. But Olivia blows it all out of the water, as the bride with a shining ruby on her crown. Before she was a vampire, Olivia was an antisocial hermit with too much money. Now she is in a commanding position though, she's called eccentric. She's vicious in flavor text at first, even wanting to watch someone bleed out. Later on she has a constant insistence on being elegant and charming. Olivia introduced a so-called holiday, named Court of the Vampire Queen, or King. It involves kidnapping a human, who is then made king or queen of the vampires for a few days. Afterwards, they are killed and their blood is shared by all vampires present. The castle Olivia lives in is called the Lurenbraum Fortress. The bottom third of this structure has been carved into a cliff rather than built on top. Though not exclusive to them, the Fthagn bloodline can more easily learn to transform into bats, cats and rats. The very last house left to discuss is something new, something exciting. The Domnathi, led by Henrika. This absolute badass finds human blood too gauche, too bland. She drinks demon blood instead, in exchange for doing favors for them. Vampire sires seem to be bound to the demon blood as well, in exchange for loyalty. She bites and turns Odric into a vampire, but finds out he has actual holy water in his blood. He is probably being set up as some sort of good vampire like Blade. Maybe he's more like Angel, with Talia as Buffy, and the two friends can be the second magic reference to this 90s TV show. Why not? Earlier we shortly mentioned Sir Christopher Frayling in relation to his notes on Polidori's story The Vampire. We'd like to end with a quote from him from a reading last October on the changing nature of vampires in the last 100 years of cinema.
It's one of those myths that seems almost infinitely flexible. You can bend the rules, you can take some of the rules and jettison others, you can invent new rules as they did with Nosferatu, you can re-energize it and retell the fairy tale over and over and over again with slightly different nuances to relate to changing anxieties in the audience.
To recap the analogues: The Vampire and Edgar Markov, Carnilla and the Falkenraths, Dracula and the Markovs, Nosferatu and the Sangiers, The Shining and the Mauders, Interview with the Vampire and the Nusvar, Shadows over Innsmouth and the Stromkirks, the Fthagn as Magic's own traditional vampires, the Domnathi as Magic's new spin on vampires, and finally, Odric and the archetype of the good vampire fighting other vampires. That's everything for now. We hope you enjoyed this overview. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. Hope to see you next time.